Hello. I'm going to show some archaeological comparisons, some archaeological photos. So starting apparently with this one, which is it's a Mayan, looks like it's a Mayan sculpture of, I believe it's the sun god Kinichi or something like that. Forget what his name is. He's a god with a weird face. And then it's a very similar god in Japan, which has a very similar bird figure on his head. And so yeah, there's a good chance these represent the same deity, because Mayan culture was heavily influenced by China and Japan and Asia generally. A lot of Mayan art looks incredibly Japanese. A lot of Mayan art is clearly Hindu, and a lot of Mayan art is clearly Chinese. But this one, it's not the clearest picture, but yeah, you can see there the thing on top of his head is very similar, like weird. It's like similar kind of open mouth, and it looks like it might have originally had the same thing in the mouth in both pictures, or both artifacts rather. So the Maya were I think about 1000 to 2000 BC to until current times. They still exist down there. All right, so I'll find another photo. I feel like this is the easiest way to do it, so I don't show something scandalous here. Some of my crazy memes or whatever. Here is a Chinese Chinese influence on Teotihuacan, which was the first real major city of Mesoamerica. It was basically where Mexico City is. It basically is Mexico City. Mexico City was built on Tenochtitlan, which was the Aztec capital that was basically built on top of or next to Teotihuacan. And so here we see on the left the Chinese artifact is from Liangshu, I think is I'm not sure the pronunciation, Liangzhu. And it's and that might be the site, like the type site where this stuff is discovered. Might be a modern name for it, but it's basically a Neolithic or early Bronze Age civilization. I think basically Neolithic, and this kind of deity that's shown here is very central to the Liangshu culture. It was the ubiquitous. You see this on possibly most of their artifacts. You see some variation of these type of shapes. This basic deity or what I think we're looking at here is cosmology. I think most pagan religion was about cosmology, and not just like fanciful cosmology, but like symbols for describing advanced science. So I think here what we have are the three major or two major levels of the cosmos and of the planet. I think up top you have like the world, the face on top, and then the face on the bottom likely represents the underworld. And here in Teotihuacan, obviously the face is different because we have a more aquiline, there's basically a bird's face on top, which is not really necessarily the case in the Chinese Liangshu one, which looks more or less humanoid. But they both do have the same feather headdress, large feather headdress or similar, large feather headdresses. And they both have the same underworld deity that's underneath them, which is named Tlaloc by the Aztecs in Nahuatl, but Nahuatl, however you pronounce it. But like Tlaloc is, most easily identified by his eyes, by having the big round eyes, and also often associated with the color turquoise, basically. And often has a kind of upside down mouth, sort of a frown looking mouth, and there are other traits as well. But the eyes are, I think, probably the most famous distinguishing characteristic of Tlaloc. And Tlaloc, I think, clearly derives from this Chinese Neolithic deity, the underworld deity. And of course, in Aztec cosmology, Tlaloc is the underworld. So it makes sense that he's like, this is kind of what would be called a tree of life in Mesopotamian and Levantine culture. But it's basically cosmological. It shows the world, the underworld, and the sky. And it also represents the monarch of the kingdom. And so you find that a lot in the Neo-Assyrian tradition, a very similar type of quote-unquote tree of life, which is cosmological, and also it looks a lot like this. Often has a distinctly bird head, but it's also a tree, and it's also a king, and it's also the cosmos, particularly the planet. Or it seems to be particularly the planet. It's certainly cosmological. All right, I'm going to find some other. Okay, so here's something that also I believe is also cosmological, and basically the same thing in a way. These are depictions of the cosmos and of the world, of the planet, with the 4 directions, but divided actually into 8 directions. Basically further divided into 8 directions. Kind of northeast, southwest, northeast, and then northeast, northwest, southeast. I don't know, that kind of thing. And so yeah, we have a mixed tech version of it, and I can't be fully sure that all of these are this exact same thing, but I think they all relate. I think they're all based on the same science, and you see the same kind of 3-pronged nodes or whatever, these lines with 3 prongs on the end in the Norse and the Mayan, and basically in the Mixtec as well. So these are like, I think a lot of the Tibetan mandalas are basically this type of cosmological map / calendar. This Tibetan one, I think, is not Buddhist, but Bon, which is kind of probably the pre-Buddhist religion of the Himalayas, which is probably the source for their mandala tradition, and may have been influenced by some Chinese cultures and possibly also from ancient civilization from Iran. That I think is what they claim themselves. So there's that. Let's find some more. See, here we have Laja Gauri or Gauri, the Hindu goddess, and then we have the Egyptian Horus, and then we have on the bottom our it's either an Aztec and a Mayan, sculpture, or they might both be Mayan. But what I'm really focusing on here are the Eye of Horus that's shown. Let's see, right there. On either side of Horus's head, there's these, eyes of Horus. It's also there's another name for that, but Anidjet or something like. But anyway, so I think it represents, again, something cosmological. I think this is all cosmological. Either represents something celestial or terrestrial, some natural phenomenon. And here you see very similar in the, well, it's actually hard to see. I think I have a different image that might be better, but it actually has the same curl. And it's something with fire. I think the Eye of Horus is often described as fire or associated with fire. And and these two objects surrounding Laja Gauri are look to be kind of like fire as well. And then here, very similar, depictions to each side of this figure. On the left, well, both really, that look like fire as well. And on the left here, they're actually incorporated as either the hair or headdresses of sort of, mythical beings that are flanking the main figure. But I think it's still just a different way to depict the same thing. And I think it is cosmological. And the question is, what does it represent? I mean, one theory I had, which is kind of probably not likely, but just something that could be, is that it's related to the Aurora Borealis. That the main figure is maybe like cosmological, showing the world, and then the Aurora Borealis flanking them. But again, it's probably not that. It's like I'm still trying to figure out what it is. So, but maybe it is that. So we'll find out. So I'll find the next. Okay, yeah, here we go. This shows more clearly the similarity. So here you see the curl that comes out of the back, comes out of the bottom of the eye of Horus. And then here, hopefully, yeah, here you can see the curl that is in the same spot on this kind of floating torch or something. And again, the Eye of Horus is often described as relating to fire. So it's just a question of what it is, like what specifically it represents. Okay, here's a ziggurat from Iraq, from Ur in Sumer, Mesopotamia, like probably at least 4,000-year-old ziggurat, maybe 5,000-year-old ziggurat. Ziggurats are kind of, maybe could call them proto-pyramids, but they generally predate the pyramids and are found in, Mesopotamia along the Tigris and Euphrates. I think maybe the earliest one might be in Eridu, the city of Eridu near the Shat al-Arab. So that's the one on top. The one on bottom is I believe the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan, like I think it's a sun temple of Tenochtitlan. And so basically Mexico City, the capital of the Aztecs. So we see in both cases there's a similar number of levels. There's, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending how you count the levels, there's basically a very similar number, similar kind of shrines on top, although a different number of shrines. And, just a lot of similarities in the shape, and I think similarity in the concepts as well, because I think these are cosmological as well. These are also showing the Earth and the cosmos, the different layers of the Earth. They divided the Earth into different, sections, sometimes 14, like there would be seven on the top, seven underworlds, 7 overworlds. So the overworlds are whatever part of the planet Earth oneself is on, and then the underworld is the antipodal realms, basically the antipodal hemisphere on the other side of the planet. And then that would often be depicted underneath a pyramid, even like there would be sometimes an inverted pyramid basically dug into the ground underneath a pyramid, or like shafts that go underneath deep into the ground that would represent the underworld and its different divisions. So yeah, I think it's clear that the Mesopotamians had a huge influence on Mesoamerica, especially through the temple construction, which are closer to Mesoamerican temples, pyramids, whatever, of Mexico and surrounding areas, surrounding countries are basically ziggurats. That's what they're basically, Mesopotamian ziggurats. And so I think a lot of that probably starts from Teotihuacan and was spread from there, because Teotihuacan seemed to have a lot of Mesopotamian influences, particularly Neo-Assyrian, which the Neo-Assyrians carried on the same ziggurat tradition as their kind of Sumerian and Akkadian forefathers, ancestors. So there's that guy. What else we got? Here is Sweden. So this is the Sigurd Sigurd monument, or carving, or rock art. I believe it's in Sweden, or yeah, it is in Sweden. So again, this is cosmological. Like I believe almost all like religious art is cosmological. And so this snake, or this kind of like serpentine, band that goes around the Swedish image, that seems to be the ocean. Basically what the Greeks called Oceanus, which is basically depicted not because they thought this is what it looked like, but just first for kind of symbolic simplicity's sake, depicted as a serpent that encircles the world. Like the tree in the middle is probably the Yggdrasil, or I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but basically the Norse cosmological world tree. And so basically the Norse tree, world tree, like different branches of that would represent different parts of the world, different parts of like Europe and Asia and Africa. And then the roots of the tree, I believe, go into the underworld, which would be the Americas and Antarctica. But what, in their language, it was called hell, and also called Valhalla. Or at least there certainly was, a lot of overlap. I mean, some of the Valhalla traditions are celestial, but they are also terrestrial, I believe, because generally everything is celestial related to something terrestrial. As above, so below. So this shows Sigurd, and he's cutting into this snake, kind of the way maybe that Seth cuts into, or Horus or somebody cuts into Apophis, Apep in the Egyptian tradition, and that might symbolize crossing the ocean. And the place, maybe it was showing an opportune place of crossing. Maybe it's showing something celestial crossing the ocean and disappearing over the horizon. That I'm not really sure. I'm not sure what all of these symbols are, but I can pretty much guarantee that most or all of them are relating to cosmological natural phenomena. And here we have very similar pieces. And it may be that Sigurd, well, I'm not sure if Sigurd is, if he is a person or a god. But like in these cases, we have these figures cutting through this very similar, band, and we have a very similar tree basically there. The Yggdrasil, or the Norse cosmological tree, is presumably seemingly the same as this one in Mexico. Believe, well, it's either Aztec or Mixtec. I guess that might be Aztec. And in the Mayan one, I think in the Mayan one and in this other, probably Aztec one, the figure that is cutting into this band, cutting through this cord, represents, well, at least in the Aztec one, he represents the underworld. This is, that's Mictlantecuhtli or something like that. But basically he represents the land of Mictlan, which is one of the underworlds. It's, I think, often described as the Eastern underworld as opposed to the Western Tlalocan. So he would be more like Europe and Africa as opposed to Asia. and there's a very good chance that's the same in the Mayan one here as well. This deity cutting through. I mean, he's clearly a deity by his, his morphology is heavily Neanderthaloid, Cro-Magnon, which is in the Mayan tradition is often denoting a god, or at least anthropologists often refer to it as the old old gods. So I'm not sure what exactly that means, but he looks like it's Samna, who is kind of their main god, but the fact that he's wearing the leopard, or the jaguar skin or whatever that is, tells me he might not be at Samna. He might be like Bolan Yokte or some other. But I mean, the jaguar was very much associated with the underworld as well. So whether he's Itzamna or the jaguar god, I think both of them are associated with the underworld. And then here in the Iraqi, I'm not sure if this is Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, or what, but basically they all shared a lot of the same religion and pantheon and cosmology. So you have a figure, one god is cutting into this bent tree, and I think that there's that the tree is representing the same thing as these bands and these cords that are being cut into in the other artifacts here. So he's cutting into it, he's grabbing hold of it, and you have kind of similar figures inside it. In some of these, there's always some figures inside this band. So yeah, a lot of this is cosmological. Clearly there's something celestial there in the Iraq one. That's either, I'm not sure if that's Venus or if that's the sun or what exactly that is. It might be Venus. Maybe that's Ishtar on the left and represented by Venus in front of her head. And then, but yeah, I have no idea who the other ones are. It could have to do with the sunrise. That's basically the red figure, let's say in the Mexican one, is the sun god, and that the underworld here, like basically Africa or Europe or something, is cutting a hole in the ocean that surrounds the world and divides the world from the underworld in order to usher the sun in and across the ocean to the other side of the planet. And that might be the case somewhat here as well in the Iraq one, where there's some kind of small deity or smaller seeming deity that's like emerging from this tree that might represent a sunrise. So that's all I got there. I mean, there are probably people who know more about each of these specific ones and could fill in a lot of the blanks, but I don't think I'm wrong in the main contours of that. Let's see, here is a tree representing part of the world, like a world direction, and the figures on each side. This is Aztec, and these figures represent also like directions and parts of the planet. And then, so the main similarity here is just that you have in India, you have a tree that's coming up out of, basically coming up out of some kind of geometrical, shape, and then above the geometrical shape is a basically a solar disk, what would be called a solar disk in Mexico, but in India would be called a wheel, like a wheel of time, or maybe a solar wheel, but I think there's a lot of overlap in what those are, and that's like a central motif in Buddhism and probably Hinduism as well, and I think was used in pre-Buddhist Himalayan religion as well. So you see on both sides, there's that kind of round circle at the base of the tree with different kind of spokes on it, and that, I think it can represent the sun, and it can represent time. And beyond that, it's hard to say much about it right now for me, but it's a very important ancient motif, ancient meme. Let's see, here is Mount Meru, which is supposed to be the center of the world in Hinduism. I'm not sure if it's an actual place or if it's just basically the name for wherever one is like the Mount Meru, and I mean essentially the whole planet is Mount Meru, but it's often given like a specific center, but I think where its center is might depend where you are. But I was just interested that this large rock in Ireland it's a huge is the Alna Marine, a huge fractured erratic chunk of limestone, is said to be the point where the 4 provinces of Ireland meet. So just the fact that it's a similar name might denote might imply a similar etymology, marine and meru, and it might simply mean like the middle, the meridian, in kind of Proto-Indo-European language. So that's something to think about. Here we see Indian Hindu goddess, who is this? Meenakshi on the left. And then we see a goddess on the right. And so they both have, it's kind of difficult to see on the Indian one, but the Hindu goddess Meenakshi has 4 hands. So you can kind of see like she has like the hand with the jewel in the middle of it, and then there's another hand next to it like holding something. And she has these kind of long draping elements of her clothing that drape down in front, one draping onto her over her torso or chest, and the other one draping down between her legs, and behind her. So those are the huge similarities. Also the red, the fact that in Mexico, I think this is an Aztec codex, in Codex Barbonicus, that the face is red, and that on Meenakshi her third eye is red here. Also there's snakes coming out of Meenakshi's head, basically, and especially on there's even more maybe coming on one side of her head, which is the same side as in the Mexican one, that these kind of just more nondescript shapes are coming out of. So I mean, some of these things are actual attire that were worn by ancient, priests and shamans in India, like some priestess, the priestess of Meenakshi, like the high priestess of Meenakshi. Meenakshi may have actually worn all of that. And so when it was transferred to Mexico, they may not have been able to get as realistic snakes for the headdress, so they kind of just have this stand-in as these, whatever they are, some other type of shapes that are the similar shape as snakes, but may be understood by participants to represent snakes. And of course, there is a snake right next to her head, and that snake is wrapped around what is described as a centipede by some, but I think also may represent a spinal cord that's on this side, this kind of yellowish, brown type of shape that's wrapped around the snake there in the Mexican image. And I think that if it does represent a spinal column, which it looks very much like it, that might be paralleled above Meenakshi on her throne, or whatever that is, that it looks like there is also a spinal column, bent over above her head there. So this is, they both have 4 hands. They both are wearing very similar attire, and they both have what seem to be spinal columns alongside them. And again, if, I think somebody told me that was a centipede or something like that, or millipede, but that doesn't rule out that it's also a spinal column, because if there's one thing the ancients did was overlay symbolism. So there are many things that represent more than one thing at the same time. Like the sun sometimes could be represented as an insect crawling across the sky. So they knew it wasn't a real insect. What else we got here? Here's Egypt, a woman praying to a serpent god, or serpent, some kind of serpent. And here in Mexico, you have a woman, I think, praying to, or somebody praying to and giving offerings as well to a serpent god, or some kind of serpent figure. And, again, it's probably cosmological, but I haven't cracked it enough to give you the specifics. Here again are Egyptians praying to snakes, and here are Aztec and Mixtec Mexican codices showing snake priests, or snake, I guess a snake priest and a snake priestess being worshipped and given offerings. So yeah, it's probably cosmological, but I don't know exactly how or what exact cosmological elements are being portrayed. This is the Peruvian one. Is let's see, it's from Lambayeque. So I think it's basically Moche. Lambayeque is like either connected to the Moche civilization or close to them. And so they were a very advanced civilization in South America from, at least like 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And heavily influenced by China, actually, in a lot of their surviving art. But in this case, this is actually a reconstruction, of course, of the way that they were buried. Basically, that there was some royal or noble or whoever it was that was buried like this, with their body upside down, and their